How long?
2 years, 4 months, 18 days, 36 hours, 15 minutes.
Any casualties?
Casualties, Mom?
Has anyone died?
No, Mom. Everyone's fine.
Well, then wake him up.
Okay, record go. Let's go.
Hello and welcome. Welcome and hello. This is Wait, You Haven't Seen. It's a show where we talk about movies, and specifically, we talk about a movie at least one of us has never seen before. I'm your host, Travis, aka TV's Travis. This is episode number 246, and our movie this week is 2012's Prometheus. And here to talk with me about it, a dear friend of mine, it's Paul Jaissle. Paul, how you doing?
I'm doing really good, Travis. Yes, we've known each other for quite a while, but we haven't spoken in a while. I'm glad we have this opportunity to talk about movies. This is going to be fun.
So you are somebody I've wanted to get on for a little while.
Okay.
If for no other reason than we haven't spoken in a while, and we have known each other for so long.
That's true.
I knew you did some podcasting of your own, and I've always liked conversations we've had about music and movies, because you have a different take on a lot of things, but then there are things that we cross over on, so it always makes for good time. And so we got talking, and when we started talking about what movie to do, you brought up Prometheus. So what I'm curious about is, you didn't see it, and you mentioned that you were kind of a casual Alien fan. Is that kind of why you just sort of, you figured it was tied to the Alien universe? I'll get to it sometime, maybe.
Yeah, and I think, looking back, I remember when the film came out, and again, like, Alien is a franchise that, I'm again a casual fan of. I love the first two films, obviously, because they're great films, and like a great example of how to make a sequel to a perfect movie, without ruining either one, and then, the sequels after that are kind of diminishing returns. And then when Prometheus came out, I remember getting a lot of, if not outright negative reviews, very mixed reviews, and a lot of like heavy criticism from people that I knew that were big Alien fans. I'm like, well, if that's the case, probably doesn't need to be something I need to see, since I'm not that invested in the franchise as a whole. And those sort of mixed reviews made me think, like, yeah, maybe not worth my time. But I recently went back and watched the original Alien again. I was like, man, this is such a great movie. I'm very curious to see what the problems people had with Prometheus, to kind of see it with my own eyes, to see would I have the same problems if I'm not as invested in the franchise. So that's the main reason I wanted to watch it with you.
Sure. So on first watch, what's your overall take on just the movie itself? What's your take on it?
Sure. It looks lovely. I think it is undoubtedly a Ridley Scott film, which I think is the strongest thing going for it. It's clearly something that he is really invested in, both personally and as craft, as a filmmaker. And I really love some of the performances. I think Michael Fassbender is great in it. I think Noomi Rapace is great in it. That said, I kind of, like, by the end, didn't really care. It's like, I don't know if I was distracted or maybe wasn't sure what to expect, but it wasn't until the last 20 minutes that I kind of like felt, this is what I've wanted the film to be up until now. You know what I mean? It felt like it was a very slow pace and oddly paced. So I guess the short version is, I think it looks lovely. Some of the performances are great, but in the end, it kind of felt weirdly pointless to me. Does that make sense?
I can see where you're going with that. Now, here's a question. If you didn't know anything about it ahead of time, if you were just going into, hey, there's a sci-fi movie from Ridley Scott, and there's no mention that it's tied to Alien in any way, do you think that changes the viewing of it? Or were you kind of looking for threads of the Alien DNA within the movie while you were watching it?
Yeah, I mean, the parts that I found interesting were both the direct references to the Alien franchise. When you see the what do you call it? The navigator, toward the end there, when like they're in the ship and the navigator, like the dead navigator, if you see the first Alien, it's like, oh, that's that again. So clearly it's a tie to that. And also the sort of thematic ties I thought really interesting. Cause like I said, the end of the movie I thought was kind of like more satisfying than anything that led up to it, because I realized it's not really the Alien franchise, specifically the first two Alien movies, are about like hubris, and people trying to control humanity trying to control knowledge. And up until then, you have this film is really about that. It's about artificial intelligence, something that Ridley Scott's very interested in. You have this idea of like someone's trying to gain knowledge about human, the origins of humanity and all this. And at the very end, you have Noomi Rapace's character basically saying, like, it's not knowledge for use, it's knowledge purely as curiosity, and that's why she's the only one that survives, because she's curious and not just trying to control things. So like that theme I think runs through the first two Alien movies, so that's what I thought was really interesting. I get that answer the question. Like I don't think I would have enjoyed it had it not been for those few direct references or the thematic connection like that.
Yeah, which I do think when you have Ridley Scott. Oh, go ahead. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But like when you get Ridley Scott doing sci-fi. Sorry. Yeah.
I think that's the strength of the film. But again, it's so Ridley Scott's not interested in doing a sci-fi movie. He's doing this introspective, meditation on human knowledge and human nature and this quest for knowledge and this ongoing sort of philosophical question of like, what if you meet God, but God wants to destroy humanity? You know what I mean? Like that's kind of like a recurring theme in the film. All that's really interesting. I just don't think the story or the characters are engaging enough to keep me invested. It's like the ideas are more interesting than the film itself at a point.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. No, because you mentioned like the first thing you said was the movie looks fantastic. And I think it also sounds fantastic. And if there's one thing Ridley Scott can do in anything he makes, whether it's something like Matchstick Men, which is just like a character study, or it's something like this or Gladiator or whatever, he can make a movie look fantastic. Like he's just got a great eye for things. He works with great cinematographers. I think I like this movie, but it has flaws, and those flaws for me come about in the script. I think that the overall ideas, as you mentioned, are very interesting. I do like the idea of, sort of these questions of artificial intelligence, of meeting your maker, of sort of the nature of humanity. Where it falls apart a little bit for me is that the script, like the characters in this, not all of them feel very competent to me in certain parts. Whereas like one of the strengths of that first Alien movie is all of them, regardless of kind of their characterizations, were good at what they did. And here I feel like outside of Noomi Rapace and David, Michael Fassbender, the only other character that's actually like the characters that are good at what they do are the three that go down with the ship, the captain and the two pilots. Like,
right.
So,
well, I was thinking about that, and that's one of the main criticisms I remember when the film came out. A lot of people were saying like, "Oh, these characters are just making dumb decisions, constantly throughout the film. Like, they don't really explain why they're doing this. It just feels like they're stumbling along." And like, maybe it's a generous reading of it, but I think maybe again, Scott is so interested in the name Prometheus, he's hinting at, it's like it's the hubris of wanting to get knowledge and being punished for it. So it's like, these characters are incompetent because he's showing like, our human attempt to gain knowledge often stumbles upon itself and leads to bad results. So it's like the actions of the characters could be his way of showing that. But again, when you're watching it, it just seems like, oh, they're just really dumb. Like, why are they doing this stuff?
Yeah. And it's the things that can drive you crazy are the things like the biologist who, when they get to the planet, initially is interested in going on the mission. And then when they get there and they find the dead body, he's like, well, okay, I'm going to leave with the other guy. Like, no, this, you know what? This is a little too weird for me. They get stuck there. And then when he finds the alien snake, he's all trying to cuddle up with it. And it's like, you're a biologist. You should maybe know, like, that thing's in a threatening mode. You don't want to get closer to it at that point.
Right.
Or
that's hard to justify that one. Yeah,
that one, and the other one is when they found the one body, and they get back to the ship. They haven't found the other guy, and then they get his tracer, his camera, or whatever, right outside the ship, and so the first thing the guy says is open the door, and he opens the door, and there's like a crumpled, folded up version of the guy, like his body there. And he just walks over to it. Like there again is a thing were we just not trained at all for like hostile environments, period? Because that one felt to me like,
Right.
just like self-preservation alone makes me feel like I wouldn't go near that thing, having no idea what it is, let alone walk right up to it and then just stare at it. So, but again, that's got to kind of move. We got to move things forward, and we got to get some sort of an action sequence going on here. So we've got 17 crew members on this ship. We got to thin those out.
Yeah, I think that was something also I kind of realized as I was watching it, is like, again, you mentioned the first Alien is like, it's a smaller crew and each crew member kind of gets their moment to get some personality. And that doesn't happen because it's a bigger crew.
Yeah.
And like you said, like the only memorable characters are like sort of the main characters. I think Charlize Theron's character is really interesting, but she doesn't really get a good moment until the very end.
Right.
Idris Elba's character is the same thing. He gets a couple like interesting moments, but like the rest of the cast feel disposable. And again, maybe that's a story choice that he's, Ridley Scott sort of using that to underscore some of the movie's themes. But as a viewer, that's not the first thing you're thinking about when you're watching the film. It's only on reflection that I sort of thinking about that. And again, I don't know like how rigorous of a training or hiring process you have to go through to be hired by Wayland, the Wayland Corporation. I mean, maybe they just hired the cheapest people they could find. So.
Yeah, I mean, that's entirely possible. They don't tell them what the mission is till they get there, which is a weird way to do things. Like, you're going to go into cryosleep for 2+ years, and then we're going to tell you what you're here for. So enjoy, strap in, let's go. I always love when movies do that, because we got to have our exposition, right? Like, we've got to have that moment where the movie tells us what's going on, and so to do that, they have to tell it to the crew of the ship as well. But that's fine. Like, the characters themselves, most of them were at least somewhat interesting. What's his name? The American, not Tom Hardy. Why can I not think of his name? Logan Marshall Green. That's who it was. He
right. Yeah.
His character I like, except for he just very quickly goes from, oh, this is the greatest thing ever, to, well, we failed. And it's like, dude, you made one of the greatest discoveries and scientific things of human history, and you're getting drunk because you're upset that it wasn't exactly what you wanted it to be.
Right. Yeah. Again, and I think that comes back again at the end of the film when you realize that, Noomi Rapace's character, like, she basically says, I'm here because I'm curious. I don't like necessarily need an answer. The questioning is what's important.
Yeah.
Again, maybe Ridley Scott's using that to show the larger themes of the film. But again, like when in the film itself, you kind of miss those moments.
Yeah.
Because you're like wondering why those characters are doing this. And again, I think that's one of the big flaws of the film for me, is like, I really didn't, when characters died, I didn't really care. I mean, and again, it's not maybe fair to compare it so much to the original Alien, but there is obviously a connection there. So Alien did such a good job of giving those characters those moments, even the small crew members like Harry Dean Stanton's character, and his friend, like those characters that would be disposable in the film, they get to have these nice moments and develop some character as the film goes on. I don't know.
And
I did like, again, the connection where at the end you have like the three characters, like you said, who sacrifice himself. That feels like, again, a tie back to Alien as well. It's like, oh, we're going to have to destroy the ship. And like, it'd be nice to have those characters have more development, so that moment had more weight. Aside from Idris Elba, I didn't really remember the other characters in the movie at all until that very last moment where it's like, take us home, or
and then you're like, oh yeah, Benedict Wong is in this movie, like, and he has literally nothing to do, like, but yeah, I'm with you, and I think part of that is, I think the other thing for me because I think the overall story is very compelling. I do think though that the stuff with Wayland himself at the end, I feel like that could have been left out completely. Like, he didn't have to come back into the movie as a character. And I think that it actually would serve the movie better, because it would give more time to Charlize Theron's character and Idris Elba's character and let them do something instead of suddenly shifting the focus to him.
Yeah. I do, well, I might criticize that because I do think there's an interesting moment there where there's a moment where Waylon and Charlize Theron are having a moment together, and she expresses some, like, you find out, like, he's her father,
Mhm.
and she expresses some affection toward him, and he like pulls his hand back and doesn't want that affection. It's like, I thought it was a comparison between that character and David, Michael Fassbender's android character, where it's like the quest for knowledge. It's not even knowledge. Like, Waylon just wants to live forever. He's like, I'm going to ask these aliens how I can just,
Mhm.
not die of old age. That turns him into less of a human. He's colder than an android at that point. And the same thing with his daughter. Like, she comes off as very cold and unfeeling throughout the film. The one time she expresses any type of genuine emotion, it's rejected by her father. That's a really interesting story. Unfortunately, it happens right at the end of the movie when that could have been a whole other story.
Yeah.
Up until then, would have given more weight. So I do think that's a great moment. I like that idea. But again, I think it was too little too late almost at that point.
That's probably a better way to put it. You actually have a good, because I think if Wayland was a character maybe throughout the whole thing, because we get that one hint that he's not dead, right? Because there's the scene where David talks to somebody very quietly, and then he runs into Vickers, and they have their confrontation. But then that's it. Then it's sort of like, no, don't worry about that. And then it comes back, 20, 30 minutes later or whatever. I think had Wayland been more involved throughout the story, you could have developed that relationship or lack of relationship between him and David and him and Vickers, and have all of that play in more.
Yeah.
So you're probably right there. It's like either do that or just cut him completely and don't have it, like one or the other. But you're right. Bringing him in too late. Now it's like, oh, we've got another plot we're going to try and squeeze in here. But now, other characters get shortchanged because of that. So that it's just a little too much.
And I think it's also an issue again of the pacing, because it happens so late in the film, and so much of the film is these like slow, ponderous scenes. And I understand, like, Scott even has said, like, it's very much based on 2001, Space Odyssey, and like that film has very similar themes about artificial intelligence, the nature of humanity, the quest for knowledge. They're very similar films. Unfortunately, like, Ridley Scott can't maybe do those long, ponderous, slow scenes the way that Kubrick was able to do that, because Kubrick built a very sense of unease in those scenes. A lot of those scenes in this film just felt like eating time. Like, there's not as much suspense as maybe Scott was going for in those scenes, I thought.
Yeah, and I think some of that can come from the fact, because he can do those types of shots. I mean, he does that in the first Alien. That first Alien has a very slow build before things start to take off. But I think he did himself a disservice by even mentioning Alien leading up to the movie. Like, because he tried to distance it as far as saying, like, look, this isn't a prequel to Alien, but it's in the same universe. There's threads of the alien DNA in here. That immediately creates expectations in the audience. And I think that I like having those connections there is awesome. I think it would have been better to have it be something where nobody knew about that going into it. And I think that it would have reviewed a little bit better in that case. Because then you could have said, like, oh no, he did do this. I mean, it's obviously that cat's out of the bag. There's no way to put that back. So you have to go with what the movie is. Yeah. And I do think that on its own, you're kind of right in that the movie it has that slow mentality in parts, but then it also like gets us out into space really quickly. And it doesn't waste a whole lot of time getting us onto the ship and getting us to the planet. So there's a little bit of pacing.
Right. And I think that's, the other issue too is like the first Alien does such a good job of creating a sense of like space. Like, it's a movie that it's kind of grand in scope, but it also feels very claustrophobic. And I think that was my issue with this film. Another issue I had was like, I was never quite sure where everything was taking place. Like, I never got a good sense of, the world. They keep jumping back from the ship to, the pyramid that they're exploring. It's like they're jumping back and forth constantly.
Yeah.
And I never got that same sense of claustrophobia or just like impending doom that you got in that first Alien So it's a very different experience in that regard.
Oh, very much so. And that, that was one of the big hallmarks of that first Alien film, is a haunted house in space, and containing everything within that ship is brilliant. And you're right. I think part of it too is like, we don't understand, we don't get a good feel for the scope of how big that pyramid is and how big that ship is until the very end. Right. And by then, even then, we don't fully kind of realize it in comparison to the size of the Prometheus, which is not a small ship. It's much, I think it's bigger than the Nostromo was. And so, and they did such a great job visually of capturing all of this stuff, because like the set design and the sets they built, and then they built a lot of very large sets, so that they wouldn't have to rely on making everything within a computer. They could do a lot practically and then extend it. Yeah. Which is smart, because I think it gives it a more grounded feel. And I loved all of that.
For sure.
But you're right in that you're in the ship, then you're in the pyramid, then you're back in the ship. You're going from one to the other. Of course, there's going to be a storm, right? Like you can't have a movie landing on a desolate planet without there being a storm that forces something to happen. Right. That was the other good one, by the way, was the two of them getting lost on their way back. And so then they're stuck in the pyramid while everyone else got out. I forgot completely about that happening when I started watching it again. I'm like, oh, that's right. That's why they're stuck in there, because they just got lost, I guess. Right. But it's, sometimes you got to have, because the writers said so is the reason for things happening in a movie. Which is fine.
Yeah. And, that's fine. And like, I'm willing to roll with that stuff. The film is telling a specific story. And again, I think Scott is less interested in making an Alien sequel than he is exploring these larger themes that, have been hallmark of his career for a while. So like, I understand all of that. It's just, again, that, and the idea that you would spend so much time exploring those without giving a satisfying sort of conclusion to them. Yeah. I do like the way the film ends, as I said, but it's like the questions being raised at the end don't need resolution, but I think if the film as a story doesn't get the resolution maybe it needs, right? Does that make sense?
No, it does, because I have no problem, and I've said this a lot, especially in the last year on this show, that I love movies that will ask you questions and then not answer them. Like David Lynch is prime example of that. David Lynch will make you ask a question, and then he'll just be like, no, I'm not answering that. Like, I don't care. I've quoted this one a few times, but have you seen Mad God by Phil Tippett?
No.
Okay.
No, not yet.
It's bizarre. And it took him 20 something years to make, or whatever it was. Sure. But he was on The Last Drive-In with Joe Bob Briggs. And Joe Bob has Phil Tippett on. He says, Phil, what is Mad God about? And Phil Tippett looks at him, pauses for a second, then he says, it's about an hour and 45 minutes. And that was the best answer you could give. Like, because the movie is bizarre beyond belief. And so I have no problem with that. I think what happened here was the questions that did need an answer to help the story didn't get answered, and other ones got answered that we don't really, okay, that's fine. But like for instance, the engineers. Okay. I think the idea of the engineers is really interesting. And I like the opening shot of the movie. First of all, the opening vistas that they did, where they went and they shot all this outdoor stuff in Iceland, and then they added in like more mountains and thing. That was breathtaking. And I really wish I'd been able to go see this in a theater when it came out, because I didn't. I saw it shortly after it hit, home video and all that. But you get that opening with the engineer, and like the idea of the engineer, and it's a human, but it's sort of almost like a peak of the human physique in a way. And the whole thought process of like, as the movie unfolds, of the engineers they engineered us, they created humans. Why? And that's what Noomi Rapace wants to find out, and all of this. And I'm even okay with the idea of, because I love the line between Holloway and David, where David asks him, what would you or why do you think I was made? And he's like, well, we made you because we could.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole idea of how disappointing would that be
Right.
for you to meet your maker and have them say that, like, because it's a perfectly plausible explanation, right? They're just like, we were bored and made some life, and there you
Sure.
go. But the way that unfolded, I didn't love, because it just felt weird to me, the way they meet the one engineer and he just immediately goes like Hulk mode and starts just killing everybody. Felt
well,
like
the thing is,
what it felt like, I'll just say, is it felt like creating an antagonist for the end of the movie because we didn't have one yet.
Right. The one thing I did think was interesting, it was right before that moment. David is talking to the engineer, but we don't know what he says.
Yes.
And there's always that thing, again, it ties back to the first Alien, where Ash, the android character, has ulterior motives that are not revealed until the end. Is that the case? Because this is, again, we see David intentionally poisoning Holloway, and he's acting as an agent to do these things, and we're never quite sure why, which, again, that's a question that maybe needed to be answered. Because is it just an evil corporation, the go-to bad guy for any sci-fi or action film? Is it just evil? Wayland's an evil corporation,
right?
I don't know if that's a satisfying answer to that, but I do think that's one way to maybe explain the engineer's behavior at that point. Whatever David said to him seemed to trigger that response, because as soon as he finishes saying it, he rips David's head off. That's the first thing he does.
Right? Yeah. Now, there was, I guess, originally in the script, they have the translated line of whatever it is that he says, and they were going to have that subtitled.
Oh, okay.
And there is an extended scene. I think when they released the Blu-ray for this, they had some extended scenes, and one of them was that scene was a little bit longer, and the engineer actually responded.
Interesting.
Before doing what he did. And then Ridley Scott decided it would be better to cut, to just not do the subtitles at all. And I like that, because we don't necessarily need to know what he's saying. But I think because, again, we had so little kind of, we knew David was up to something, but like you said, we don't really know why. We don't know, is it that Wayland told him to do this, or is he going out on his own? Because David is an android. So as an audience, we're kind of predisposed to well, androids will only do what they're told to do, like how they're programmed. But David feels like he's going beyond that, because there's that moment with Shaw, with Noomi Rapace, where she says something about parents. And he's like, well, don't we all want our parents dead? And of course she, her response is, no, I don't. But he does, because he resents Wayland at this point. I feel like I have this feeling like he's, he is feeling those. I mean, the way he acts around Holloway, and even because Holloway treats him terribly, he just doesn't. And you get this sense that he picked Holloway to do that too, because of the way the guy talked to him. But there's that. So I get this feeling like David was doing a lot of this on his own. And Wayland just wanted to live forever. And so that was the foot in the door. But that idea where he was told, do whatever it takes. And so that's where I feel like David then kind of took that and ran with it.
Yeah. I mean, it is, again, the connection to 2001 is obvious, the HAL, the HAL 9000 kind of, gained sentience in a way that, what I think that is different, though, HAL becomes evil, where David, I don't think necessarily becomes evil. It's just by the end, he becomes curious in a way that the other humans, aside from Noomi Rapace, the character Shaw, they're not curious at all. No. So David kind of learns that behavior in a way as the film goes on. Unfortunately, his curiosity leads to him, again, killing Holloway, and maybe causing that reaction from the engineer, So yeah, I think, again, all that stuff is really interesting, but I didn't think about that during the film. During that scene in the film, I'm just all right, we're wrapping things up. It's only on going back that I've made those connections, and maybe that's a strength of the film, because I'm still thinking about it and trying to make it make sense. Or is that a failure of the film for not doing that in the moment? I don't know. I keep going back and forth, like how much I actually enjoyed the film, because I'm enjoying thinking about it and talking about it more than I actually enjoyed watching it. So,
And
I mean, maybe that's the short review. So, yeah.
yeah, which kind of fits in with the whole, like for me, I don't typically give movies scores because I just feel like reducing the experience of the
Right.
movie down into a number or a single grade like that is not really what I want to do with movies. But were I to score this, it feels like it would fit in that like 3 out of 5 range. Like it's good, but is it great? I don't know.
Yeah.
Like I certainly will watch it again at some point if somebody wants to, but I think about it.
Yeah.
But
Mhm.
it's not like it's not that type of thing where I'm like running out to tell people they need to watch it type of deal either.
Right.
But it's interesting because you like Hal,
Yeah.
I feel like in 2001, Hal is less evil and more just like cold and unemotional. And so he doesn't think about life.
Right.
He just
Yeah.
thinks about whatever is most efficient.
Mhm.
David, to me, does that
Right.
to an extent. He definitely goes with the most efficient, but there's also something in him that does feel like he wants to rise above what Wayland thinks of himself. Like David wants to kind of prove that no, I can be as human or better. Because he is, I mean, if you really think about it, David is a superior species to humans in most ways. He's stronger, he's faster, he can memorize and recall a whole bunch of stuff. So there's all of that, but he doesn't have the soul. And so
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I mean, again, the HAL 9000, again, it's not so much evil, but yeah, the cold, uncaring, it lacks the human,
there's no empathy,
soul, or a sense of sympathy or compassion.
Yeah.
Right, exactly, yeah. And I think David at a certain point is hints that he might have learned that. That whole conversation him and Shaw have at the end about, it's like, how can you still have faith knowing that you were just created by an alien race? And she's like, well, it's not so much faith, it's curiosity. Like I still want to know.
Yeah.
I'm driven by that. I'm not disappointed in the knowledge. I just want to understand why we were created. Doesn't matter who did it, but why. I need that answer. You know what I mean? It's the why, not the how. And I think the rest of the characters are more focused on the how versus the why, which is a really interesting conversation. But again, it happens in the last like 5 minutes of the film.
Yeah.
Which I think was why I enjoyed the ending so much. But I was like, boy, I wish that had been a running theme or more explicit throughout the rest of the movie. That would have made it more engaging to me. So.
More explicit, I think, is the thing to do, because they hint at that quite a bit here and there, but it's so subtle and it's not fleshed out until that third act. And like the idea of, Shaw being a scientist, being somebody who studies these things, but also somebody who has a deep faith and a belief. I mean, that whole line from, her dad in the dream of, well, it's what I choose to believe. And she follows that through, is both like antithetical to the scientific method, but also kind of very important to her as a character, because it does inform her curiosity and it helps to give us that. So like, that's interesting, but coupling that with her science background and with this idea of why, not how, whereas Holloway was all about the how and wanting to know the nuts and bolts and meet the maker, meet the engineer, and didn't get that and immediately thinks of it as a failure. And then the other thing I love that these movies do, and I love a science fiction movie especially that does this, is to have people involved that don't care about the larger story in general and are just there to make a buck, because that feels like a real world.
Right.
That was the one thing, like in the first Alien, you had Harry Dean Stanton and Yaphet Kotto's characters they were just the janitors. They kept the ship running and they just wanted to get paid. They didn't care about anything else. And here you've got the geologist who's like, I don't care about you at all. I'm just here to make some money. Sean Harris's character, who I love Sean Harris. He's great in so many things.
Great.
Actually, and Rafe Spall too, the biologist. He's a great actor.
True. Yeah.
Given almost nothing to do here, which is unfortunate, but
nothing to do. Right.
The funny thing is, I had seen this. So I had seen Hot Fuzz and Shaun of the Dead and all that kind of stuff before I saw Prometheus. but I didn't make the connection to
Yeah.
Rafe Spall being the same guy when I saw Prometheus the first time, because his American accent's pretty good.
Okay. Yeah.
And he's wearing those
Yeah.
big glasses, and you don't see, like, because he's in it so little, I'd never made the connection that it was the same guy. That's one of the Andys from Hot Fuzz, one of my favorite movies ever. So
Yeah.
knowing that's him, I'm like, man,
That's true. Yeah.
like him and Idris Elba both do really good American accents. I think Elba's going like,
absolutely. And again, like I liked his character a lot too, because he's very convincing as that sort of like, as soon as you find that scene where he's talking to Shaw and he's basically saying like, this isn't their planet, they're making weapons here. That whole scene is like, all right, suddenly it's like less about that's the scene that I think expands the story the movie's trying to tell in a really interesting way. It's like, all right, it's not so much about trying to meet your maker and get these answers. It's the disappointment, is like you said earlier, it's like the disappointment of knowing like it was just done just to do it, and now they're developing these weapons to destroy what they created.
Yeah.
Shaw wants that answer. Idris Elba just like, we just gotta get out of here. I don't care. Like,
yeah,
I'm not taking this stuff back home. I don't even want to, like, I'm just done with this. That getting that answer of knowing that your creator is going to destroy you, and it's that one response being, okay, well then I'm just going to leave because like I don't want to be destroyed. Or
right.
the other response being, well, I have to ask them why. So like that, I really like that. So I guess to tie it back, like I think Idris Elba's character did a really good job of playing this person who goes from, I just got to get out of here, I'm just here to pilot the ship, I'm leaving, to realizing, I need to save humanity by blowing up this other ship.
Yeah.
It was a nice character shift. Again, I just wish he'd been in the movie a little bit more to give that more weight.
So that was another extended or deleted scene. There was a scene, I think, with him and Vickers, where you learn a little bit more about his background. Yeah. He was in the military, and you just you learn a little bit more. So that change makes sense, because that scene where he comes back in and he starts telling Shaw, look, this is an installation. They're making weapons of mass destruction here. And I'm thinking,
yeah,
didn't the last time we see you were just like hanging out with a blanket around your shoulders? Like, it felt like we went from A to F
right,
and we skipped a few steps in between. And I think so I kind of tend to beat this drum a little bit too much, but I think this particular story in this kind of world, because Ridley Scott's really good at world building too. And there's a good bit of world building in this. I feel like this would have been better served with maybe another bit of story or a limited series where they could have fleshed out some of this stuff a little bit more. Because it is high concept, and high concept sci-fi needs a little more room to breathe and kind of just let things shake out and give us more of these characters, because then you care about them. So when they do die, it actually has an impact. Even with a small amount of characters, like 17 characters, you could have given a little bit more to some of them, because most of them don't even get a name. Like, there's the scene with the guy Jackson who has the flamethrower, and I don't think we ever see him again, do we?
Yeah.
He might have been killed by the zombie creature when it attacks, but whatever. It was just 4 faceless, nameless people that bit it right there.
Right. I think that's an issue of the pacing of the film, is like it needs to hit these big action set pieces, and it kind of sacrifices story to do that, and that is interesting to me, because like I think Ridley Scott is very interested in doing this sort of like ponderous philosophical film, and yet the story almost demands these action sequences. Maybe it didn't need those. Like, does it really need those scenes?
Yeah.
Other than to thin the herd a bit, so it is just Shaw at the end. But it's like a lot of those action scenes, I'm just like, all right, now it's I check my watch, I go, it's time for another action scene. I have to do, it's like that type of pacing always stands out to me in these kind of films. And I wonder if that's Scott, or it's because he co-wrote the film with Damien Lindelof, right?
Yeah.
Am I getting his name right? Yeah.
Yep.
And it's I wonder if that's the thing too, because again, I think the reason Alien works so well is because of Ridley Scott, but it's also Dan O'Bannon's script, which is something O'Bannon had worked years on. Like that was a very important story for him, and he put a lot of himself into that. And I think that's what that combination makes that movie work. So like, how much of that, the flaws in the film are Scott versus, you know, a co-writer, or, you know, the demands of a genre film. So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, all that plays into it, right? Because this is a good film, but it could, what would push it to being a great film like Alien is that synergy between your director and your writer, and also the passion project behind that, of like O'Bannon working on that for so many years and going there. That's why I think when Ridley Scott is at his best, when he's doing something like Blade Runner, for instance, where he has this great concept and idea, and he's, granted, it took him whatever it was, 15 years to finally distill it down to where he wanted it to be because of the studios, but like he got it there. And that's what makes that movie
that's true.
So fascinating still, almost 40 something years later. And then Denis Villeneuve taking it and just being like, hold my beer, we'll go somewhere even crazier. Because I love Blade Runner is great. Blade Runner 2049 like elevated it somehow, which I didn't think was possible. And like Ridley Scott can do these amazing things, and I do think that he is on his way there here, but I do think there was something got hamstrung somewhere, where just the execution of this, the script itself just didn't quite have the polish that it needed. And I think some of it too, I think some of the enjoyment of this movie can come down to, do you like Damon Lindelof's writing? Because that's going to be a big, you know, it's going to play a big part into it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think the fact that I did like so many of the ideas in this movie, but yet ultimately kind of like didn't care, that comes down to the script. I think that just comes down to, you know, as we've been saying, the problems of like not really caring about the characters that much, other than the maybe like 3 of them, and then not quite knowing what their motivations were. You know, there's a lot of scenes, you know, like we said, whether it's intentional to show this sort of hubris or this, you know, arrogance of these human characters in the face of this larger unknowable thing that they're trying to understand, or is it just poor writing, or just like, we got to get from point A to point B, the quickest way to do is, like, you know, to have this happen. I don't know. That, I think that's kind of what makes the movie honestly really frustrating to me, is like liking it but not kind of like caring. Because I do want to go back very briefly, because we talked about this a little bit ago, and you mentioned, you know, the look of the movie, and it actually is so satisfying to sit down and watch a big budget sci-fi movie that is real. You know, it's not all CGI. And I think I have to applaud that, because like that is such a rare thing these days, to see a film that is this large in scope, that looks so great, and isn't relying on CGI. Like, it gives the movie a very distinct look and feel, even though I criticize it not creating a good sense of space. Regardless, the set pieces do look amazing. You know, when they're in the sort of navigation room, you know, and all that stuff, it's stunning to see that stuff and knowing that it's real. And like, I don't want to downplay that, because I think that's the stuff of the movie, on top of the philosophical aspects I liked the look of it so much because of the practical effects and all that.
Yeah, the practical sets, and then what this movie did, and to think that this movie came out in 2012, it's 11 years old now, and it still looks this good. Because it looks real. It looks like you can reach out and touch all of this stuff. Like those shots at the beginning I mentioned, where they're real shots of, I think they did it in Iceland, is what they said. So there's shots of landscapes in Iceland that then they digitally composited in, you know, extra features in the background. But by doing it the way that they did, it feels like a real place. By building the actual ship hangar at a full scale size, and then just extending it with CG outside whenever they needed to, but trying to do that as little as possible, makes it feel real. Having the little like dune buggy thing that they would drive, and the big 6-wheel thing be like vehicles that were there. It just adds to it so much. And then you can augment that with like the holographic display that they all stand around that just
Right.
looks fantastic.
Yeah.
And again, looks like you could just reach out
It's
and
great.
like run your
Yeah.
hand through it type of thing. So yeah, the
Yeah.
look of
Yeah.
everything is just so good.
Yeah, I really got to appreciate that. There's not a lot of movies that came out 10 years ago that still look good.
Mhm.
They're because of like the way technology moves, the way CGI is developed. It's just like things look very dated. This did not look dated to me, in that regard. But I do want to, as we've been talking, I've been thinking about this.
Yeah.
Does the movie need the alien connection? And the more I'm thinking about it during this conversation, I'm not sure it does. It feels like you're almost gilding the lily at that point, because the whole idea of like the xenomorph showing up at the very end, it's like, why? It's like, was the xenomorph created by the engineer to, is that the weapon of mass destruction they created? Like, that doesn't really add anything to the larger themes that the movie's exploring in my mind. It feels unnecessary.
Yeah, which is why, like I said earlier, like I just feel like had Ridley Scott not said that in an interview, because what he said was like the threads of the DNA of Alien. If he doesn't say that at all and just let this be its own story, and then you can hint, because they did make a sequel to this with Alien Covenant,
Right.
and David is in that, but that was very much kind of
Okay.
Ridley Scott being like, well, everyone said they wanted an Alien movie, so fine, I'll make another Alien movie. And he did that. I haven't seen that one yet.
Sure. Okay.
Because I didn't hear great things about it. But
No, I mean,
it's one of those things where I agree with that. I agree with you in that it doesn't need the tie-ins to Alien, or you just don't talk about them at all and let that be a thing that like, oh, well, obviously it would tie in. It's Ridley Scott, but he doesn't need to do that leading into it.
Right.
Because the questions of humanity and the questions of like wanting to search for, and again, you have to suspend some disbelief and allow the hand waving of like, we found 5 cave paintings and that's enough to let us know that these engineers, like, she believes they want them to find them, right? Which is
right.
There's a big leap of faith there.
Yeah.
But also that these 5 cave paintings or tablets that they found are enough to get the Wayland Company to spend $1 trillion on this expedition.
Right.
And we get told that Wayland thinks and made them believe whatever it is that he believed, that these engineers could save him. But we only get told that. We're not given any evidence to like how did they convince him to spend all this money? Or did they just say like, well, they made humans?
Right.
Because that line he gives is great, where he says, you made me believe that if they created us, they can save us. And I'm just thinking like, you're kind of taking a leap in logic here, sir. Like, you've put the cart before the horse, which again, hubris, right? That's a running theme, the hubris and Wayland's hubris. So I get that, but it's still $1 trillion this dude spent on going here. I could have used just a little bit more to like convince me that these two, because one of my favorite lines in the movie is from Sean Harris when they're giving their presentation and he says, wait, so we're all the way out here on this planet because you two found a cave painting? And like one of them's like, yes, and the other one, no.
Yeah, that is really interesting. That, I think, again, it speaks to the almost like the tension between the themes of the film and the story itself, the plot versus the larger themes at work. And it's like the idea of the engineer is like so fascinating, and it's like the fact that they do meet these aliens, and it's like, but their motivations are almost entirely unknowable, or they should be unknowable. And it's like when the movie tries to give them an explanation, it's defeating what makes it a compelling idea in the first place. Like I like the idea of us not being able to know what the engineers are actually doing. So when people start, just saying like, oh, they could save us, or like, oh, all this stuff, how do you know that? You know? That's the leap in logic there. That's the leap. That's the thing that it'd be more interesting if the engineers were their motivations were completely unknowable, I think.
Yeah.
And it does hint at that. I think the movie does hint at that at points. Again, like we talked about earlier, like why the engineer goes nuts and starts destroying everybody and is dead set on going to Earth. Is like, what is the motivation for him to go to Earth to destroy it? It's like,
Mhm.
does that need to be answered? Is maybe more satisfying if it's not. And I guess the movie doesn't quite give us that conclusion, right? Why it's headed to Earth, but
No, I think too, like we get glimpses of the engineers in those holographic like recordings where there's the one in the hallways where they're all running
Mhm.
away from something. But was that
Yes, yeah,
like
yeah,
what was that and why was there the mural like relief of what looks like a xenomorph in that room with the giant head and all the
right.
canisters, but we don't have an actual
Mhm.
xenomorph yet, I think. I don't know. And that's where
Yeah.
some of that doesn't need to be answered, but then some of it we should get a
Mhm.
little, give us just a little bit more, just a touch more of whatever's going
Yeah.
on there. Like for a motivation. So when the engineer does come out of his cryo sleep, we at least have some
Mhm.
reason to understand why his first reaction is kill everyone in the room, take off for Earth. You know, give us
Right.
something there,
Mhm.
even if you don't
Yeah,
have
I
to
think
spell it out, but like as
yeah.
long as we just have an idea of, oh yeah, okay, makes sense. Why he would do this. That's where it gets confusing to me.
Mhm. It does get confusing, yeah. It it is funny because I mean, the film obviously there's the famous idea of like ancient aliens or the chariot of the gods. This idea
Yep.
that aliens somehow came down to engineered humanity. Like that's not a new idea. That's been around for decades. It is almost funny though because it leads to that meme of like, how do you explain the pyramids, anything? It's, I don't know, aliens. And
Right.
then in this film, why are the engineers running and why are they doing anything? I don't know. Xenomorph. It's like the same answer. It's why are they heading to Earth? Like why do they on
Yeah.
this planet? It's like, I don't know, aliens. The same answer. As
True.
the film is kind of playing with in that regard.
Plus, I mean, you
Yeah.
have to take the leap of logic
So
that
yeah,
like
I do think
I was just gonna say you have to take the leap of
Mhm.
logic that
I
like
was gonna
David
say like I
figured out the language too, and he understood how to open that door
right.
and all this kind of
Yeah.
stuff in and
Mhm.
yes, he's very intelligent and yes, he's able to glean a lot of information and hold it. But we're not given anything to give a baseline for where that came from.
Right. Yeah. Is it explained? Is it like since he's studying like he said the roots of like a European and uh Hindu language, so he knows like the roots of like the earliest forms of human language and communication. He
Mhm.
understands those roots, and since these aliens created humanity, they must speak the same language. Again, that is a kind of a big leap, because in the
Yeah.
beginning of the film, it's not like it's implied that the engineers are helping shape humanity's path. Like the one engineer basically sacrifices himself
Mhm.
to create human DNA. That's what happens in the opening sequence.
Yeah.
But it's not like they're being Earth's being visited by them again. That's what's being implied by the star charts, the things that they find. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I
Again, the
suppose.
movie should maybe answer these questions rather than us trying to speculate on them.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's where that's the thing that that hurts it is that there are questions that it should answer that it's not. Like it's okay to ask questions that you don't intend to answer, but some of them do need an answer
Right.
to get us started. We got to get
Yeah.
rolling in that direction. And I mean,
hmm hmm
when it really comes down to it, it's not like I said, it's not a bad movie at all. But I think that
No.
it felt a little lacking. Like so much attention was put into the visuals and the sound because I love the sound, the
Mhm.
score for this.
Yeah.
Especially that opening score
It's really good. Yeah.
because that music has
Mhm.
this like positive, almost uplifting melody, and then occasionally it mixes in these
Yeah.
moments of like almost like a minor key something where it kind of brings you back and makes you think, wait, well, hold on,
Mhm.
wait a second. And so I love that, and the sound design was great, but there were just and the story, the
Mhm.
overall themes compelling and interesting. The actual script
For sure.
is where it just struggled a little bit. Um, it's sort of how I feel about
Mhm.
when I see something like the prequel trilogy in Star Wars, for instance, has some really
Mhm.
really cool
Yeah.
ideas, really great concepts, high level version of it. I think there's some good stuff. But some of the execution and script wise falls apart because I don't think George Lucas was a great screenwriter. He has he had good ideas, came up with great ideas, but as a screenwriter, and then I also think somewhat as a director, at least a director in terms of acting performances, I don't think he was great either. He's fine, but like not great. And that's what this felt like. This felt like, because the performances are really good for what they had to work with and kind of what they got. And Ridley Scott's always been good at that, and he's always been good at the visuals. But that's just the thing it's missing, is that script just has too many holes in it that keep it from being great. It's still very watchable. And it's obviously something you think about afterwards and you can talk about.
Yeah. No, I again, as I was, thinking about what I want to say during this conversation and doing a little research on my own, like kind of like reading other reviews, I'm like, there's a lot of really interesting ideas in here. It's just, I'm coming maybe now more to the conclusion that including the alien DNA, as Ridley Scott put it, that's what really hinders the film. Because I think there's more interesting stories than this is how xenomorphs were created. And also, it's maybe unfortunate that I'm watching this after having seen Arrival, which I think deals with a lot of very similar issues. That's another high concept sci-fi film.
Yeah,
that handles those ideas a lot better because it doesn't have this other franchise, looming in the background during it. It's like it's standalone film. So I think, seeing this after that movie maybe hinders my experience of Prometheus a little bit. Because I'm like, oh, you can also do a very similar story way better, as Arrival shows.
Yeah, or even I saw The Creator earlier this year, and that has it has similar themes, but it's still that same kind of high concept sci-fi. By the way, that's a movie that looks like a $100 million movie, and it's like I think the budget for that movie was like $70 million, which by today's standards is a very small budget for that big a concept of a movie. It looks like 2 or 3 times that amount. It's crazy. But yeah, I think
nice.
I think you're right. I think being tied to that alien thing does hamstring this a little bit, because now this story wants to be its own thing, and then you can find out later, you can make the connection yourself, but kind of planting that seed, now you're beholden to that. Now you're stuck in that world, and you can only go so far. You can only stray so far from that before you have problems. So
yeah, for sure. And I think, speaking of the franchise as a whole, I think that's kind of one of the issues, is that Alien is such a perfect movie as its own. It doesn't need a sequel. It ends satisfying. There's really no reason for there to be another Alien movie. Luckily, James Cameron was smart enough to know, is like, oh, you can't just do another Alien movie. You have to do an Aliens movie. I love the story, whether it's true or not. When he's pitching the idea for the film to the producers, and he writes Alien on the chalkboard or on the whiteboard. Yep. And then he adds an S. Oh yeah. Aliens, and then turns the S into a $sign. It's like, that's how you make money. Like that's, and that's why that movie is so great, because it takes the basic alien DNA and turns into this amazing action movie that only James Cameron could do. Yeah. And then after that, every other Alien movie kind of like is diminishing returns, because you can't quite capture that experience again. I mean, Ridley Scott and James Cameron are very different filmmakers, but what they do well, they're the best at, almost.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean? So those two movies work so well. And that's why the other films never quite live up to that, because they don't have that same sort of intensity. And they're also beholden to this mythology that's been created by the other two.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I mean, David Fincher is a great filmmaker, but he had the problem of, it was one of his first films. And so he had all that studio interference. So he wanted to go in a very different direction, and got kind of stuck and really forced into doing stuff that he didn't necessarily want. But yeah, that is like Aliens is one of the greatest sequels of all time, because it doesn't try to be the first movie or do really anything that the first movie did. It's going to expand all of it. And that's how you do that. You create something new within that sandbox, within that playground of what happened before. And then Cameron, of course, did it himself with Terminator and Terminator 2. Like, those are two vastly different movies.
Right.
Because he understood you can't make Terminator again. It's not going to work. Um,
Right. Yeah.
and so you're right. Like that's a great way to
So
put it.
yeah, the other side of the spectrum is like if they ask you to do a sequel and you don't want to, you do the old John Carpenter and just make
Yeah,
Escape from New York, and just rewrite it as Escape from LA and don't change anything about the movie.
right. Or I mean, the way he wrote, like writing Halloween 2 and basically writing it, we're like, all
Right.
right, no,
In
things
like
are
one
going
night.
to end,
Yeah.
and I'm just gonna pump out a script
Yeah.
because I have to. Or even
Right.
for all the maligning that it gets, Spider-Man 3 had a lot of that, right? Because Raimi wanted to
Mhm.
tell a completely different story, and the studio's like, but we want Venom. And he's like, well, I've got this great story I'm
Yeah.
going to write with
Mhm.
Sandman, and it's gonna no, but we want Venom.
Yeah.
Fine, you want Venom? I'll give you Venom. We'll put Venom on Topher Grace. Like, there's your
Yeah.
Venom. So,
Exactly.
which I mean, it's nothing against Topher Grace. Topher Grace is fine. I have no problem with him. He just didn't
Yeah.
feel like Eddie Brock to
No.
me,
No.
at all. But
And again, like speaking of films that I think are good but are hamstrung by either pseudo decisions or the necessity to have that certain story aspects, that Spider-Man 3 and this movie I kind of feel like the same in that, because I would love the idea of Ridley Scott doing like a high concept art piece, where an art film, which is like, I'm going to ask these like big questions about humanity and knowledge. The name Prometheus is like right at the beginning of the movie. It's like, yes, this is what we're doing. We're stealing knowledge from the gods, and we know what happened to Prometheus, but that's going to happen to us, right? We're not going to make that mistake
right,
again.
yeah,
But literally the same thing happens. Like that, those big concept ideas, I would love to see the version of this film that didn't need the alien angle to it.
yeah.
Because it's
I'm with
like,
you.
there is a very compelling story here, and Ridley Scott is a good enough filmmaker to make that type of high concept, ponderous, sort of like philosophical film, but it didn't quite stick the landing here because of those things we've been talking about
Mhm.
that held it back.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, it's something that's worth watching. I'm glad that you got a chance to watch it, because
Yeah. Yeah.
being as you said, a casual fan of Alien, like I love the first Alien is one of my favorite movies. It's in like that top 10,
Sure.
15 range for me, and I love Aliens because again,
Yeah.
doesn't try to be the same movie.
Mhm.
3, it's fine. I don't have a problem with Alien 3. I
It's fine.
actually don't hate Alien Resurrection. I see
Okay.
its flaws, but
Mhm.
it as a movie is fun. I don't like the Alien versus Predator movies. I don't really think we needed
Right.
those.
Yeah.
Um,
Definitely not.
so this fits. I really don't think of this in terms of an Alien film when it really comes down to it. It
Mm-hmm.
isn't, and it wasn't meant to be. And
Right.
and I'm with you.
Mhm.
It didn't need that connection to be compelling and interesting. So,
Right.
but it's Ridley Scott, and
Yeah.
the stuff
I
that he
would like
makes
to.
is always great. I
Yeah.
just love watching his movies.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think that I do want to go back and sit down and rewatch it without the distraction of waiting for the xenomorph to show up. Because like I know the movie had been out long enough. I knew like the big parts of the movie. I knew all the criticisms people had. So when I was watching the film, I was looking for those moments that I knew people had criticized,
Mhm.
or I knew were coming. I think going back and rewatching it, and I can just appreciate the craft, and sort of like the larger, philosophical issues without worrying about that. It might be a more satisfying rewatch.
I think so, because I think every time we watch a movie, we're a little bit different every time we see it. My famous one is Event Horizon. The first time I saw that, I don't remember if you went with us for that or not.
Yeah.
I know because I went to
I
that
don't
with
think so, no.
it was Nate Butler, Dave Brumbaugh, Nate's parents,
Okay.
which
Okay,
but
great.
we weren't prepared for what the movie was, and so none of us liked it. And then I watched it a couple years
Right.
later, and I realized,
Mhm.
no, it's really good. Now I love it because I
Yeah.
can take it for what it is. So I do think there's that. There's
Yeah.
there's both taking a film for what it is instead of what we want it to be, as well as
Mhm.
who we are when we see a film. Because one that I saw in the
Right.
last year,
That's a good
Mulholland,
point.
yeah, I saw Mulholland Drive for the first time though in the past year. Phenomenal.
Oh, okay, yeah, yeah.
Just knocked my socks off.
Mhm.
I know
Yeah.
based on who I was, if I had seen that in 01, 02, I wouldn't have appreciated it the way that I do now, and it wouldn't have had the same impact
For sure.
on me. Because I just
Yeah.
that wasn't who I was then. I hadn't developed to appreciate something that David Lynch could make at that time in my life.
Right.
I needed some more seasoning for that. So I'd be curious.
Yeah.
I'd be curious to hear what you think of this on a rewatch, kind of going into it that way.
And I think, to kind of like, again, I think my appreciation and score for this movie is slowly going up over the course of this conversation. Cause again, I'm thinking about it in a different way. And, you mentioned David Lynch, one of my favorite filmmakers. I mean, I saw Mulholland Drive right when it came out. So like I was already there for it, but every time I rewatch it, I appreciate different aspects of the film.
Oh yeah.
And it's like, that's what makes for a great film. Again, like the original Alien, every time I watch Alien, I notice a little detail or notice a story thing or way that something's filmed. It rewards you rewatching it because you see it in a different light every time.
Yeah.
The reason I've rewatched Twin Peaks so many times, because every time I watch it, it's a different experience.
Yep.
And, I don't know if this will hold up for Prometheus, but I'm willing to give it another shot because I do think there's enough there to get me engaged again. So again, That's a hallmark of a good film. So as we've been saying, this is a good film.
Yeah.
Despite some some hurdles or some hamstringing. So
yeah. And it's a hallmark of a good filmmaker. I mean, we're talking about people like Ridley Scott, David Lynch. I mentioned Edgar Wright and Hot Fuzz earlier. That's a movie.
Right.
Like every time I watch an Edgar Wright movie, I find something else about it. I'm like, that's just incredibly clever. How did I not see that before? Type of thing. Like these are great filmmakers that are doing these things.
Yeah.
And I think that I also do believe that Prometheus, this script in lesser hands, is not as watchable or rewatchable as it is. It takes somebody like Ridley Scott to bring the concepts and then the visuals to life in a way that makes it compelling. So, yeah.
And again, it helps that, it explores themes that have run through his other films. It's not hard to see. It wouldn't be a surprise to think, again, like another Lynch comparison. My pet theory is that all David Lynch movies kind of take place in the same world. Like, I think, there are things that happen in all of his movies that's like, okay, the Red Room in Twin Peaks or the apartment building that Henry lives in Eraserhead, those are kind of the same place. It's like, and it's Mulholland Drive. There's a scene when they go to the club and the woman sings the Roy Orbison cover in Spanish. Like, okay, that's a place that they might have gone to in Blue Velvet. Like they're all kind of connected thematically. So it makes you put those in the same world. It's not hard to think that Blade Runner and Prometheus are taking place kind of in the same universe, so to speak, whether separate franchises because of Alien and Blade Runner, but the thematic ties between the films and the detail and craft that Ridley Scott's bring to those films, it's easy to see they're of the same DNA, so to speak.
Yeah, I can absolutely see that.
So I think that's that's what makes it, again, a compelling film for me to want to revisit. Like I revisit Blade Runner and again notice something different each time, or Alien when I rewatch it.
Yeah. Ridley Scott is one of those directors that just, if his name is attached to something, I'm instantly interested in it. I may not always like the film, like it may not always work for me, but I'm always interested in what he's doing, and he's so varied in what he makes, right? Because he can do sci-fi like this, and then just a couple months ago, I showed somebody American Gangster for the first time, like completely different type of thing, but that again, that has so many good elements and so many Ridley Scott like elements where he creates the visuals, and he's doing 1970s 60s New York, and it has that feel of what New York was like back then, where like you're watching the movie and like everything feels like it has a film of like grease over it, because that's just what it was like. And he's just so good at doing that. So he's one of those directors that I just feel like always does something interesting. He's very rarely does he do something where you're like, I mean, you might not connect with it, but it's going to be interesting.
Sure.
So,
I mean, if we're going to be making comparisons, I think another comparison I would like to make is, John Carpenter. because like I think they have weirdly similar careers in a lot of ways. Because John Carpenter he can do a lot of different types of films, but they're always kind of almost genre films.
Mm-hmm.
But they never feel like stock. Like there is something unique
Right.
to John Carpenter's approach to doing a horror film. He perfected a slasher film with Halloween. He perfected like a horror sci-fi movie with The Thing. It's like everything he does. There are certain films of his that don't work for me, but it's like everything he does have a distinct John Carpenter feel. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think
like those are films that again I like to rewatch to notice that.
You know what it comes down to, because Carpenter is one of my favorites. Like period. Like his Carpenter's run from Assault on Precinct 13 through like I would say up until Escape from LA, because I mean, for what it is, I enjoy that movie. But like that run, it's just great all the way through. And part of it is, and Ridley Scott did this too, they don't try to recapture what they've done before. Like Carpenter, like you said, perfects the slasher formula and then doesn't do that again. Wants to move on, do something new. Does a completely different type of horror movie here. And Scott would do the same thing, right? He would do this great sci-fi horror movie, and then he's like, well, I'm going to do sci-fi again, but now we're going to do some different type of sci-fi. And I'm going to make Thelma and Louise like out of nowhere. Or so it feels like it's just there's something to these artists that are always trying. It's sort of the David Bowie idea, right? Like Bowie never did the same thing album to album. And that's what made him so amazing was you were getting something new all the time. And that's good artists do that. Like even Lynch does stuff that feels, you saying that you feel like all of David Lynch's works kind of exist in the same world. I'm with you on that 100% because it's this weird stylized version of our world, but it's his creation, but he doesn't just make the same thing again and again, or, even similar things. He's always going in a new direction and he's always trying something new because he's curious about that. And Ridley Scott is one of those types of filmmakers.
Yeah, for sure. And and it's almost like at a certain point, filmmakers like that have a reputation or have a style and noticeable hallmarks on their films. The ones that don't quite work or almost stumble are almost more interesting. Because one of my favorite Carpenter movies is Prince of Darkness, which is not like a great Carpenter movie, but it feels like a passion project. Like I love it because it's like only he could do this, and like not all. It's almost similar to Prometheus. There's a lot of great ideas in that movie, and they don't quite all fit together. But the way Carpenter handles it, it gives the thing a almost cohesive feel, even though the story is a mess. It just feels great. It's just an interesting movie to watch. Yeah, because again, I think it's something he's passionate about, something he's very curious about, and I think it's a nice parallel to this movie almost. Yeah, no, that's a good point. And honestly, I'm with you in that talking about Prometheus more is making me appreciate more about it. And sort of, I'm able to, I still have like that doesn't make any sense. And, that's kind of a dumb decision. But at the same time, I'm curious enough about the rest of the movie that I sort of can give some of those things a little bit of a pass and acknowledge the flaw while also appreciating the overall craftsmanship that goes into something like that. So for sure. Yeah. Cause that again, as I've been saying, maybe to tie things up, it's visually as a film, as a visual experience, the level of craft is what is so compelling about the film to me. So yes, absolutely. If for no other reason, watch it on a nice big screen with a good sound system. And because it's worth it. It's worth it to watch the best fidelity copy of this you can, because, and that's why I really wish. And this was also shot in 3D, which what I like about it is you can. I mean, if I didn't tell you that and you just watched the movie, you'd have no idea. There's nothing because there's no gimmicky 3D to it. But like that scene with David when he's watching the holographic stuff and then that big star map, that big giant globe, like I can imagine sitting in a theater with like 3D glasses watching that being something just kind of mind-blowing because for sure that had to have just looked really cool. But it looks so good in 2D in high def because they went for the look of everything first rather than being gimmicky with the 3D. So
I just
Yeah,
enjoy
it's
that.
funny to think about that whole period about 10 years ago where everything was in 3D for some reason. I
Mhm.
always kind of forget that was a thing.
Yeah, and things that didn't need it, like Thor: The Dark World or Harry
Right.
Potter movies, like they don't need 3D at
Right.
all.
Yeah.
So yeah,
No.
no. Look, it's a good movie. Just temper expect. Don't think of it like a movie in the Alien universe. Just think of it as some high concept sci-fi, and I
Exactly.
think you can have a pretty good time with it. Because
Yeah,
it does
for sure.
have the performances and the visuals just carry it. Like it, Michael Fassbender
For sure.
as David is just unreal.
Right.
How good he is.
Mhm.
And Numi Rapace as well. She's fantastic.
Yeah.
And has that
Yeah,
scene
I was
with
really surprised by her performance.
the whole scene in the medical pod where it's just her acting in
Mhm.
that. Just
Yeah.
I mean, it's a great performance
Great.
because she has to go so hard with all of that to really make you feel what's going on, and she does. So
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. At a certain point, I was thinking like, because going in knowing that it is tied to Alien, I'm just like, oh, they're not going to ever. Are they just doing this to make the comparison to Ripley as the sort of like the one, strong-willed female character? But like, they're completely different performances. Like those, it's not just we have to have a strong female lead because the Alien movie. No, there's a very standalone performance. She's not trying to be Sigourney Weaver. It's a very different approach, and I really appreciate they didn't just let's just slot in another female character to be Ripley in this one. And it's a very different take on it.
No, it feels like it's the correct way to do it. It's the proper way to go about having that.
Yeah, for sure.
In there. Well, man, this has been great. I've loved talking with you about this movie.
Yeah.
So something we'll have to do again for sure, whether both on the podcast
Absolutely.
and at some point over some beers, just sitting down and talking, because that hasn't happened
For
in
sure.
far too long. Now,
Yeah.
you have some stuff. You have a show that you work on.
Yeah, that's true. I am a contributor and co-host on the I Read Comic Books podcast. We've been doing that for, almost 9 years now.
Nice.
New episodes every Wednesday. We talk about, obviously, comic books, but it's not superhero themed. It's all types of comics. We have a rotating cast of people that come in every week to talk about comics they love. It's just about celebrating the medium and the art form of comics that we all enjoy. So I'm really happy. I'm really proud of that show. Our most recent episode that came out just last week featured Ed Brubaker, is one of my favorite comic book writers. And it almost was like coming full circle, because when I started reading comics again about 10 years ago, his books were some of my favorites at that time. So like getting able to talk to him on my podcast was a nice sort of like, bring all together. So you can find that anywhere you listen to podcasts. I Read Comic Books. We also have a Patreon where we have exclusive bonus audio. I host a show where we just talk about Batman comics, obviously. We also do a I Read Comic Books movie club where we talk about comic book related films. I'd love to have you on that at some point. We'll have to schedule that.
Definitely.
So yeah, you can find that everywhere on social media at IRCB Podcast, and then patreon.com/IRCB Podcast.
Excellent. Definitely check that out. And I love that you do one on just Batman. That's very, very perfect for you. So this show,
the one thing I like to talk about more than films is Batman.
So this show I record Sunday nights, and I stream it live at twitch.tv/TVsTravis. And then after the fact, it comes out on Wednesdays as a podcast, anywhere you get your podcast, and on YouTube. And you can find that by just searching for Wait You Haven't Seen, or find me on any of the social medias as TV's Travis, and you'll find links to it from there. I've got a website, tvstravis.com, which has this show and other shows that I do, including Those Were the Days, Gore, and Let's Watch Highlander, which is in its probably final season, because we're running out of Highlander properties to talk about. And I do have a Patreon as well, patreon.com/WYHS. You can subscribe, and there is exclusive content coming, some new content coming there as well to the Patreon feed. So definitely check that out. But Paul, thank you so much for being here. It's taken too long to get you on the show, but it's taken too long for us to just chat again as well. So
Absolutely, Travis. No, this is a real treat to talk to you. And yes, I will take up on that offer. Next time we're in the same city together, we'll have a conversation over some beers. That sounds great.
sounds awesome. Well, next week I have Nicole Davis on. She is coming on, and we are going to talk about a classic movie that I have never seen before, and I don't believe she has either. We're going back a ways to 1946, and we're going to watch the best years of our lives. I've never seen it, and so far the classic Hollywood stuff that I've watched for this show have all been great. So I'm really curious to watch this one. So that's what's coming up next, and then I have some fun stuff coming up in the new year as well. So stick around for that. But until next week, Paul, thank you so much for being here, and we'll definitely do this again sometime.
For sure.
Awesome. And just remember to enjoy your movies, and let's be excellent to each other. Okay? So Ben Wait you haven't seen.
No, ship's good.
Yeah, ship very good.